The golden chandeliers of the Bennett mansion's grand ballroom sparkled with dazzling light, casting brilliance over the polished marble floors, the towering arrangements of imported roses, and the long tables draped in velvet and silk, yet for all its magnificence, the atmosphere remained strangely hollow, as though the luxury itself was mocking the emptiness within. At the center of the room stood a colossal cake, layered in pastel frosting and crowned with 12 glowing candles, meant to celebrate the birthday of Emily and Grace, the twin daughters of Richard Bennett, one of the city's most powerful CEOs. But while other children darted around with laughter and games, Emily and Grace sat quietly in their wheelchairs at the edge of the long banquet table, their small hands folded neatly in their laps, their eyes fixed on the flickering flames of the untouched cake, as though waiting for someone to notice them. The accident that had paralyzed them 2 years ago had not only robbed them of movement but also stolen much of the joy that birthdays once brought, for even though their father filled their lives with every luxury imaginable, designer dresses, the most expensive toys, a home bigger than most hotels, he could not give them the one thing they truly longed for, a sense of being seen and loved without condition. Guests mingled noisily, sipping champagne and whispering about stocks and contracts rather than singing a song for the girls, and their children, dressed in glittering outfits, kept a distance, casting curious yet uneasy glances at the twins as though their wheelchairs were invisible barriers. Richard himself was across the hall, cornered by investors who seized the opportunity to talk business even at a child's birthday, his expression distracted, his presence more of a shadow than a father's embrace, and though he had given the girls a quick pat on the head before walking away, it was not enough to warm the ache in their hearts. Emily glanced at Grace, her twins' lips pressed tightly together to hide the disappointment, and whispered, "Do you think anyone will sing?" Grace shook her head softly, her eyes glistening under the glow of the candles. Just as silence thickened around them, the heavy oak doors of the ballroom opened with a creak, and a man entered, a man who clearly did not belong among the glittering suits and sequined gowns. His suit was plain, worn at the elbows, his shoes scuffed from long walks, yet there was a quiet dignity about him, and beside him walked a young boy clutching a carefully wrapped gift that looked handmade rather than bought from some luxury boutique. The man scanned the room, his gaze settling on the 2 lonely girls at their table, and something in his expression softened, like he had discovered the very reason he had come. He bent down to his son, whispered a few words, then guided him gently toward Emily and Grace. The boy placed the small gift in front of them with an earnest smile, and the man leaned down, his voice warm and steady, asking, "Can we sit with you?" And in that instant, for the first time all evening, the twins felt a flicker of hope that maybe this birthday would not be as lonely as the rest. Emily and Grace hesitated for a moment, glancing at each other as though silently asking if this man and his boy were truly different from the rest, but when Ethan, the boy with the bright eyes and easy smile, pulled up a chair without waiting for permission, the twins found themselves giggling in surprise, a sound they had not made in a long while. Daniel, the man who had asked to sit with them, didn't carry himself with the stiff politeness of the other guests. He crouched low so he could meet the girls at eye level, his voice gentle yet alive with warmth, and instead of commenting on their wheelchairs or offering pity, he asked them about their favorite colors, their favorite books, and whether they liked chocolate or vanilla frosting best. Grace, shy at first, murmured that she wanted to be a painter someday, her voice trembling with the fear of being dismissed, but Daniel's eyes lit up as though she had declared something magnificent, and he told her that painters were storytellers of the soul, that the world needed more people who could turn colors into feelings. Emily, emboldened by his kindness, admitted that she still dreamed of learning piano, though her hands often failed her, and instead of looking sorry for her, Daniel simply said, "Then you should. Music doesn't care if hands stumble, it only cares that the heart keeps trying." For the first time in years, the girls felt their dreams treated as possibilities, not impossibilities. Ethan, meanwhile, leaned forward and whispered conspiratorially that chocolate cake was always better than vanilla, making the twins laugh as he pretended to argue with them about frosting like it was the most serious debate of the evening. When the candles flickered again, Daniel did something none of the other polished guests thought to do. He sang the birthday song, off-key but wholehearted, and Ethan joined in, his small voice lifting above the din of clinking glasses and murmuring adults, and as the song reached its end, Emily and Grace closed their eyes, made their wishes, and blew out the candles together with Ethan's playful puff beside them. their laughter echoing above the hollow chatter of the ballroom. Across the hall, Richard Bennett froze mid-conversation, his gaze drawn by the sight of his daughter's wide smiles, smiles so genuine he barely recognized them, for it had been years since he had seen them light up like that, and the realization unsettled him deeply. The other guests whispered disapprovingly about the stranger, who had dared to intrude, their eyes darting toward Daniel's plain suit, but Daniel didn't flinch, didn't shift under their scrutiny, for his attention belonged entirely to the two girls before him. Emily and Grace forgot about the opulent decorations, the cold stares, the weight of their condition, because in that small circle of laughter and warmth, they felt like children again, not spectacles to be pitied. And as they sat with Daniel and Ethan, tasting the cake, telling stories, and giggling at jokes only kids could find funny, the twins realized that maybe, just maybe, this birthday was finally different, because someone had chosen not just to show up, but to stay. When the last crumbs of cake had been eaten and the final balloons began to sag against the ceiling, the ballroom grew quieter, the guests drifting away with their polished farewells, and it was then that Richard Bennett finally crossed the room toward the table where his daughters still sat with Daniel and Ethan, his jaw clenched and his eyes sharp with suspicion, for he was a man unaccustomed to strangers stepping into his carefully controlled world. "Who are you?" he demanded, his voice low but edged with the authority that made boardrooms fall silent, "and why are you here?" Daniel rose slowly, meeting Richard's gaze without flinching, his posture calm, his tone unshaken, and he replied simply, "Just a dad who saw two little girls sitting alone at their own birthday party." The word stung Richard more than he let show, for though he had built his empire by commanding respect and never showing weakness, something in Daniel's quiet honesty cut deeper than any corporate insult ever had. Richard straightened his shoulders, about to rebuke him, but Daniel continued, his voice steady yet carrying the weight of lived truth, "I lost my wife years ago, and since then, it's been just me and my boy. I know what loneliness looks like, Mr. Bennett, and I know what children need. Your daughters don't need another fleet of ponies or the tallest cake in the city. They need you, not the businessman, not the CEO, not the figure in headlines, they need their father." Silence pressed heavy between them, broken only by the faint giggles of the twins as Ethan showed them a silly drawing he had made on a napkin, their joy oblivious to the tension rising just a few feet away. Richard wanted to dismiss Daniel, to remind him whose house this was, but the truth lingered stubbornly in his chest. His daughters had smiled more tonight with this stranger than they had in the last 2 years with him. His throat tightened as he glanced at Emily, who looked up at him with eyes full of quiet hope, and at Grace, who clutched the little gift Ethan had given as though it were a treasure more valuable than the diamond bracelets he had bought her. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came, for the first time in years, he realized he didn't know what to say to his own daughters. Later that night, after the guests had gone and the halls echoed with emptiness again, Richard tucked the twins into their beds, and as he smoothed Emily's hair, she whispered, her voice trembling but hopeful, "Daddy, can Ethan and his dad come again?" Her question pierced through every layer of armor he had built, every excuse he had told himself about work and duty, and in that moment, Richard Bennett, the man who could sign million-dollar deals without blinking, found himself blinking back tears, shaken by the simple truth that he had forgotten how to be the one thing his daughters needed most, their dad. In the weeks that followed, the Bennett mansion, once a cold and silent fortress of marble and glass, began to change in ways no one could have predicted, for Daniel and Ethan became more than just visitors, they became threads of warmth weaving themselves into the fabric of Emily and Grace's daily lives, and even Richard, though reluctant at first, found himself drawn into the laughter that echoed through halls that had been empty far too long. Daniel would arrive with art supplies tucked under his arm, encouraging Grace to splash colors onto canvas, telling her there was no wrong way to paint because every shade carried a piece of her heart, and he brought music books and a second-hand keyboard for Emily, showing her that even clumsy notes were steps toward melodies that mattered more than perfection. Ethan played with the twins as if they were no different from any other children, racing their wheelchairs down the garden path, making forts out of blankets, and filling the air with the kind of mischief and joy that money could never buy, and slowly, Richard began to notice the impossible. His daughter's laughter didn't just fill the house, it filled him. At first, he watched from the doorway, stiff and uncertain, the role of father foreign to him after years of hiding behind work, but one afternoon, when Grace shyly handed him a paintbrush and whispered, "Please, Daddy, try." Something inside him broke open, and he sat down, dipping the brush clumsily into color, his daughter's giggles washing away years of distance. That evening, Emily pressed his hand onto the keyboard, guiding his fingers as she showed him the little tune she had learned, and though his notes fumbled and the melody was broken, her eyes shone as though it was the most beautiful music in the world, and Richard realized that for the first time, he wasn't watching his daughters live from the sidelines, he was with them. One quiet night, after the children had gone to bed, Richard found Daniel on the terrace, staring up at the stars, and with a heaviness in his voice that was new to him, he said, "I built an empire, but I almost lost the only thing that mattered. Thank you, for reminding me what love looks like." Daniel didn't take credit, he simply smiled and said, "Sometimes, it just takes another parent to remind us what our children need." By the time Emily and Grace's next birthday arrived, there was no grand ballroom, no business deals masked as celebrations, no guests whispering in silk gowns, there was only a small garden lit with fairy lights, a homemade cake, two families sitting close together, and voices singing loudly, imperfectly, but full of love. As the twins blew out their candles, their eyes glistened not with loneliness but with joy, for they were no longer alone, and Richard, watching them laugh with Daniel, Ethan, and himself by their side, knew that for the first time in years, he was not just a CEO, not just a man with power and wealth, he was, finally, a father again.